What was the most intense experience of your life? I spent some time cleaning up bodies, kinda like sunshine cleaners. There was this one house. Going into the house smelled unusually normal and there wasn't signs of decay anywhere, which was unusual. Then we got to the bedroom. The guy had used plastic sheets to wall off his whole room so when he killed himself it wouldn't affect the house. It got worse from there cause he tried to use a towel to keep the gunshot contained and it basically made it into a cannon. The plastic was sealed pretty well so I was able to suit up and get my mask on before going in. Even without the smell, the first sight after pulling back the plastic was the most intense experience I think I will ever have. At my lowest point, my only reason for not killing myself was I don't want someone to have to clean me up. Apostrophe. My heart goes out to that guy. First, a little backstory. I have spinal muscular atrophy, SMA. A genetic disease that slowly wastes away your motor neurons. I have never walked and use a wheelchair to get around. About a year ago, the first ever treatment for SMA, Spinraza, was fast-tracked by the FDA out of the trial phase and made available to the public. The most intense experience of my life has to be laying on a hospital bed, receiving my first dose of the drug and feeling a deep sense of hope for the first time in a very long time. Edit. Thank you all so much for your support and words of encouragement. I really appreciate it. You all just made my day. Edit 2. Thank you very much for the gold. Finding out that I had unknowingly been friends with my birth father for years. Update. Check my comment below for the short version of the story. Maybe I'll write a book someday. Retrieving my friend's personal belongings from the car he died in. It was summer, and everything was absolutely soaked in his blood. We'd been friends since childhood, and the remaining members of our group of friends, including his sister, sat in numb silence as we drove the hour-long trip back with the few everyday items we'd managed to retrieve. We left most of it there. Counter-terrorist operation in Tbilisi, Georgia a few weeks ago happened in the building where I live. 3 years ago I was bitten and envenomated by a king brown on a remote site. I had effects from the venom but worse effects from the anti-venom, including temporary blindness. It took 2 years for my organs and muscles to recover. Edit. Recovery was 3-4 months for the chronic muscle and joint pain to subside. 20 months for renal lymphatic system recovery. Edit 2. Was on a mine site in Pilbara region of Western Australia. Edit 3. Flown from site to Jandakot via Royal Flying Doctor Services, RFDS, and ambulance from Jandakot to Royal Perth Hospital, RPH. Edit 4. So many questions. I've been prompted a few times now, so I might look at doing an AMA to provide more context. Had my tonsils out when I was a kid. Was living with my dad at the time. But one particular night a couple days after, I really wanted to take a bath. And my mom had a big tub. So I went one night to stay with her for a few days. The next morning, my throat started bleeding heavily. Well, my stepdad worked second shift, so he was home and drove me to the hospital. Wound up serving a vein before I got there. Was violently vomiting blood. They had to stick a hot iron down my throat to stop the blood. Lost 4 pints total. Had 3 transfusions. Said if I was at my dad's and home alone, I probably wouldn't have made it. Was less than awesome. Having a doctor who assumed someone had spoken to me about it have a glance at my chart when I was in the hospital for low red blood counts. And say to me, well, you have cancer, so that's probably why no one had said anything to me about cancer. Everyone kept telling me my bone marrow biopsy was inconclusive because of poor quality. That was how I found out. A careless, offhand, well, duh sort of comment. I felt like the floor had disappeared beneath me. The rush of emotions I felt was unlike anything I've felt before or since. Edit. I'm doing okay given the circumstances. I'm starting my 3rd phase of treatment and my doctors are very pleased with how I'm doing. No infections or illnesses due to my lowered immune system. And got a 0 on my first minimal residual disease test, which is great. The doctor didn't really react much at all. She stood there awkwardly while myself and my family members freaked out. And during a period of quiet, said she assumed I knew. And wandered off. I never saw her again and was treated by another doctor. Had my keys stolen, which started a mini riot at the max security juvenile detention center I worked at. You're that movie security guard. I was working on a container ship going from West Coast to US to Japan. We got stuck in between two low pressure systems for 3 days. I experienced C's 40-60 FT. When Mother Nature reminds you that you're her bitch. Meningitis. Pain so intense you have a moment of panic just before each heartbeat because you know how bad your head will hurt during it. Only time I've experienced fever hallucinations. Eyes open I was in the hospital. Eyes closed I was somewhere else. Other times eyes closed I could still see the hospital room, but there was a girl with short hair sitting in a chair watching me. They didn't want to give me a Foley bag for whatever reason, so every time I went to the bathroom, which was a lot with the IV, I would spend the next 5 minutes dry heaving into a cardboard bowl. Which in turn did wonders for the headache. When I could finally eat again after 6 days at hospital, turkey sandwich was the most delicious thing. Nurses later told my wife they didn't think I was going to make it through first night. Good times. On Saturday I was rafting in grade 5 rapids in New Zealand. We flipped and I got thrown into a recirculation hole. I was being forced underwater with the power of a river with nowhere to get out. I tumbled around like a washing machine for about 30 seconds. Seemed like a lifetime. Eventually and luckily a thrust of water popped me out of the hole and into the next rapid. I got into calmer water with everyone already safe on the bank watching on in terror, hoping I was alright. My paddle snapped. I swallowed some water. But overall I lived. Discovering that my quiet and chilled out 6-day-old baby girl was actually dying and needed emergency open heart surgery. Her condition had not been picked up and we were blissfully unaware. I'll always be so grateful to the health visitor who came to see us on day 6 and expressed her concerns. Even then, we were expecting a wasted trip to the hospital. Ended up in the front of an ambulance stopping traffic. She's 2 now and full of beans. Called to a reported house fire. Neighbor states they hear screaming and saw smoke flames. This is farm country at 3 AM. Captain and I hop barbed wire fences as we frantically race to this farmhouse to see what happened. Yep. Goats. The farmer simply approached us and said, "Howdy boys. Problem?" When asked about the screaming and fire, he said he had a brush pile burning and that my goats needed a milking. Learned how closely goats and people sounded the same. Captain shook his head as we talked back to the engine and said to never mention this back at the station. Finding my dad dead when I was only 19. He was divorced and I was his only child, and that was the last day I had as a child before I had to grow up and face the harsh reality. Having a knife held to my throat by an incredibly drunk friend who got mad at me about a game of Kill, Marry, FCK around a campfire. I was wasted and he was wasted, and obviously kind of insane, and for some reason my reaction was to yell, "What? You're gonna kill me? Do it. Do it. You won't do it. I f***ing dare you." At the top of my lungs. At the time I thought it was fine and the rational way to get him to back down. But later my friends told me they thought there was at least a 50% chance this guy was gonna slit my throat. And a 10% chance he was going to marry you. Full stop. Full stop. Staring into the eyes of a stranger to whom I was giving CPR, resuscitation, and watching him die. I think a part of me went too. I hope I can grow that back by living a worthy life. 1992. April. He was 63. I was 25. It still hurts. Edit. Thank you to all those kind folks and professional medics etc who replied. We can only try to help those around us to the best of our abilities. As a side note, my dear old dad also had to do CPR many years before on a 9-year-old who drowned at a scout outing. She died too. So he was able to talk things through with me after my incident. My brother watched a man collapse and stop breathing after a heart attack jogging. Raced over to him and did CPR and that man lived. So luckily not all stories end sadly. And I would still encourage those who don't know how to do CPR to learn. And I would still jump in to do the same thing if it ever happened again. I worked as an EMT at an amusement park. I have hundreds of these kind of stories. But the one that sticks out the most is when a pregnant female miscarried in one of the restrooms. That was without a doubt the worst call I have ever been on. The look on her face is not something I will ever forget. Spending 3 days in palliative care with almost all my family watching my dad slowly die. We laughed and told stories all while he lay there sleeping. There was so much love and compassion in that room that when he finally did slip away it was as sad that we were losing the chance to spend time together in that tiny cramped room. I'll never forget watching his body die, but I also won't ever forget sitting on the floor in the room eating sandwiches and stealing a little bit from a flask of vodka that someone had brought to put in my Coke just to take the edge off. Every night you would hear the cries from other rooms as another family said goodbye only to be replaced by someone else the next day. A race to a finish line no one wanted to win. The night my wife told me she had cancer. My friend was accidentally roofied when his friend gave him a drink another man had given him. That was his second and last drink of the night. I took him home shortly after. He became belligerent and unintelligible during the 10-minute cab ride. He was unable to walk to his door. Or even stand. He was a mess. In and out of consciousness. Crying. Begging me to let him sleep. I called 911 because I was very concerned. Mid-phone call he begins to seize and foam at the mouth. I had to give him CPR twice. Ambulances finally came. I could not wrap my head around what had happened. I even asked the EMT, "Do I seem drunk to you?" Because we drank the same amount and I feel pretty sober. They had to defibrillate him to stabilize his heart. On the way to the hospital, the ER doctor said he had Rohypnol in his system and that he probably would have died if I had let him sleep it off. The next morning, my friend said the last thing he remembered was dancing at the gay bar. Drinking his drink. Almost lost my best friend. Once fractured my left nut riding an ATV in Pismo. Edit. That's the phrase the doc used. Went off a razorback at full speed and went over the ATV which landed on just my left nut. Somehow also broke my arm which didn't get noticed, or felt, for several minutes. Got surgery to remove the damaged tissue but couldn't go under because I copyright airing beating shortly beforehand. Oh. And this was all the day before my 21st birthday too. Driving home at night and seeing another driver speeding head on towards me at 65 miles per hour. Swerved out of the way just in time. No collision. Stayed on the road. No damage whatsoever. Heart rate would not come down for hours. I've gained like 5 new phobias from this thread. Hunger. Not like I skipped lunch hunger. But having no food while backpacking for 5 days. You become feverish and euphoric at the same time and stressfully obsessed about food. Your lizard brain takes full control. I ate a lot of bugs. Lost all of my body fat muscle. Would not recommend. Hunger is so much worse than anyone can know. In Chechnya at one point I went 2 weeks with just scraps of food and at the end I went into this delirious state. My mind's thoughts felt painful. Every ounce of movement felt laborious and you start to just spend every waking moment thinking about food until it consumes you. My stomach aches like never before. My muscles felt atrophied and destroyed. You begin to feel it after 2-3 days of not eating. I had maybe 500 calories a day, but after 5-10 days it just magnifies to extreme amounts. I don't wish hunger on the worst of my enemies. I have been hit by shrapnel and stabbed. But there is nothing compared to the mental and physical anguish that is starvation. Withdrawing from opioids after being put on massive doses while in hospital. It was much worse than being in the crash that shattered my spine, pelvis, and one leg, and collapsed my lungs. And it was worse than recovering from the subsequent surgeries. I gained respect for dope sick junkies who can function well enough to stay alive while homeless. Because I could barely crawl to the toilets to puke and shit my guts out. Sometimes simultaneously. Eater. Thanks for the gold. Kind stranger. I hope that others are at least as kind to those who are currently addicted. Nice. France. On the promenade. The 14th of July 2016. Never before that day did I decide which direction to move based on where I thought bullets would be least likely to be. In March of this year, I still had quite the problem with oxy. One weekend when my 2 roommates were going to be gone, I had gotten myself 10-30 milligrams oxys and was going to have a great day night of video games and relax. After sniffing 4 of them, I evidently overdosed and passed out. I later found out that they were pressed fentanyl pills. I woke up 18 hours later covered in my own vomit and sweat and fesses. No one found me because the people I lived with were gone. I very easily could have died, but because I was sitting in a computer chair I couldn't choke on my own vomit. It really got to me and gave me the motivation to stay clean. Getting my drink mixed up with the girls at a party. Getting roofied because of it. TBH though. You probably saved a girl's night. Maybe even her life. There's something to be said for that. Right? Once I woke up under my bed. After dreaming about being in a cage. Looking up at my bedboards. I thought they were prison bars and went into full freakout mode. I ended up pushing my wooden bed a couple of feet away from the wall to get out. I was 9 at the time and just very confused and scared. After about a minute of standing there I went back to bed. Still have no idea how I got under my bed. Surrounded by boxes I had under my bed. Waking up and hearing my father's last breaths and saying goodbye to him and I love him for the last time. First 14 years of my life. Grew up with my alcoholic father and stepmom. Abused in different ways and was their slave. Me and my stepsis had to work in our big ass house till past midnight pretty much every day, even those when we had school. If not, beaten or and no food. It was daily life. So I didn't really know anything else. What I hated the most though was those meetings with the teacher once every season to see how I was doing. I did all homework etc alone without my dad knowing, since I would rather work in the house than let him help me with my schoolwork. So he got to know about everything that we did that season. I was shaking during those. Also, the most scared I've been was when my classmates told the nurse that I live in hell and will most likely commit suicide soon. They took me in to explain everything that was going on. Then social workers got involved and a half year later I lived with grandparents. Edit. Some grammar corrections. I write badly. When I was a little girl I climbed to the very top of a tree that was probably 30 feet tall. It was awesome and I could see some mountains from up there. Suddenly the tree branch I was sitting on broke underneath me. I fell and thankfully landed right on a sturdy tree branch 4-6 feet underneath me in a perfect sitting position. Even though I was like 5, I swear I saw my life flash before my eyes. War was kinda intense. When it wasn't mind-numbingly boring staring into the desert for 12 hours. Honestly, having a 300-pound filing cabinet fall and pin me against the wall across my collarbone. I couldn't lift it off me and could feel it slowly crushing my airspace for 10 minutes until a co-worker found me. Said filing cabinet was in a concrete vault in the basement with 0 sound travel. It happened the day after I went skydiving and my thoughts were I'm going to die here. Crushed by a filing cabinet. Edit. Because of all the comments. I am a 125-pound female. I don't actually know if the cabinet was 300 pounds. I wasn't disastrously weak at the time. But also not able to lift double my body weight. So I chose a number that I felt was more than that and a reasonable amount I couldn't lift. And I was found. 2 full-grown men had to lift the cabinet off me. When your best friend calls you crying about his pregnant wife being rushed to the hospital, you don't question things. You just go. Spent something like 10-12 days there till an immediate C-section was needed. And the little one passed 6 hours later. I had to break the news to her as he was still with the little one. Seeing just a small glimpse of what nurses deal with day in and day out. I will quickly put anyone in place who badmouths nurses. Found a dead baby in a patient's bed after induction of labor for intrauterine fetal demise. I did not know it was possible to feel faint while seated. A close second was when a stranger attempted to sexually assault me. That was why I was stressful and had long-lasting effects.